June 4, 1945, 2:47 a.m., Tsushima Strait. Lieutenant Commander Richard Latham stood in the conning tower of USS Sea Dog, watching the sonar scope with an intensity that made his eyes hurt. Green blips appeared on the screen, each one representing a mine floating somewhere in the dark water ahead. The speaker emitted a steady ping ping. Hell's bells, the submariners called it. The sound that meant death was close. The Sea Dog was at periscope depth, creeping through water that Japan had spent 3 years turning into an underwater minefield. Hundreds of mines, maybe thousands, moored at varying depths, swinging on their cables, waiting for a submarine to brush against them. One touch would detonate enough explosives to crush the pressure hull and send 78 men to the bottom. And Sea Dog wasn't alone. 8 other American submarines were making this same run, threading through the minefields in the darkness, all of them heading toward a place where no Allied submarine had operated in over a year. A place the Japanese considered their private lake, their inner sanctum, completely protected from American attack. The Sea of Japan, Emperor Hirohito's bathtub. Latham wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool air in the conning tower. The FM sonar showed 3 mines ahead, positioned in a rough triangle. They had to go through that gap. There was no other way. "Helm, come left 2 degrees, he said quietly. "Maintain depth at 60 feet. Come left 2 degrees, aye?" Maintaining 60 feet. The submarine turned slowly, so slowly. Turning too fast meant more water noise, and noise meant Japanese patrol boats would hear them. The sonar kept pinging. The mines showed clearly on the scope now, barely 300 yards ahead. "Sir, mine bearing 015, range 250 yards. "I see it." Latham had been a submarine officer for 4 years. He'd survived 11 war patrols. He'd sunk Japanese ships, evaded depth charges, endured everything the Pacific War could throw at him. But this? Threading through minefields in the dark, leading a pack of submarines into what might be a death trap? This was something else entirely. This is the story of how American submarines adopted wolfpack tactics to wage unrestricted warfare against Japan. How they transformed from individual hunters into coordinated packs that devastated Japanese merchant shipping. How they developed techniques that would sink over 5 million tons of Japanese vessels and help strangle the Japanese war economy. The story of operations like Blair's Blasters and Park's Pirates. Of commanders like Swede Mommsen and Mush Morton. Of submarines prowling the Pacific in groups of 3, sharing targets, coordinating attacks, hunting Japanese convoys like wolves pursuing prey. And the story of Operation Barney, the culmination of all these tactics, when 9 American submarines forced their way into the Sea of Japan in June 1945 and proved that nowhere was safe, that Japan's lifelines could be severed, that the island nation could be starved into submission. So settle in. This is the story of the Silent Service. Of the 2% of the Navy that accounted for 55% of Japanese shipping losses. Of men who went to war in steel tubes, hunting under the waves, facing death by drowning, crushing depth, or suffocation. This is how American submarines learned to hunt in packs. And how those packs helped win the Pacific War. Let's start with a simple fact. At the beginning of World War II, American submarine doctrine was completely wrong. Not just a little off. Fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. The U.S. Navy had spent the years between the world wars developing a submarine force designed to support the battle fleet. Submarines were supposed to scout ahead of American battleships, identify Japanese fleet movements, maybe get in a few torpedo shots at enemy capital ships. They were auxiliary units, not primary weapons. This doctrine ignored what German U-boats had proven in World War I. Submarines were devastating against merchant shipping. They could sink freighters, tankers, and transports with impunity. They could strangle an island nation's economy by cutting off imports of food, fuel, and raw materials. But American naval planners, obsessed with the decisive fleet battle they'd been training for since Mahan wrote his books, missed this lesson, or chose to ignore it. When war came, American submarines were prepared to fight battleships. Instead, they needed to sink cargo ships. And they needed to do it fast, because Japan's entire war strategy depended on merchant shipping. See, Japan had conquered a vast empire across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. They'd taken the Dutch East Indies with its oil. They'd taken Malaya with its rubber and tin. They'd taken rice-producing regions across Indochina. They'd seized islands with strategic resources scattered across thousands of miles of ocean. But all those resources were useless unless they could be shipped back to Japan. The home islands had almost no natural resources, no oil for fuel, minimal iron ore for steel, barely enough rice to feed the population. Everything had to be imported from the conquered territories. That meant merchant ships, thousands of them. Tankers carrying crude oil from the Dutch East Indies to Japanese refineries. Freighters loaded with rice from Indochina. Or carriers bringing raw materials for the steel mills. The entire Japanese war effort depended on keeping these shipping lanes open. American submarines should have been positioned to cut those shipping lanes from day one. But they weren't ready. First, there was the torpedo problem. The Mark 14 torpedo, standard armament on American submarines in 1941, was plagued with defects. The magnetic exploder frequently detonated too early or not at all. The depth-keeping mechanism ran too deep, passing harmlessly under targets. The contact exploder was so poorly designed that hitting a target at the optimal 90-degree angle often failed to detonate the warhead. Submarine commanders fired spreads of torpedoes at Japanese ships, heard explosions, saw waterspouts, and reported sinks. Then they'd discover later that the target sailed away undamaged. Or they'd fire at a perfect setup, a fat tanker at close range, dead in the water, and watch torpedoes either explode prematurely or pass under the target without exploding at all. It was maddening. Crews risked their lives to get into attack position, fired expensive torpedoes, and got nothing. The torpedo problems wouldn't be fully resolved until late 1943, 2 years into the war. 2 years of wasted opportunities, of Japanese ships sailing unmolested while American torpedoes failed to work. Second, there was the command problem. Too many submarine skippers were too cautious. The Navy had promoted men based on seniority and peacetime performance. Many had never fired a torpedo in anger. When war came, they approached patrols conservatively, avoided risks, and returned from patrols having accomplished little. The submarine force needed aggressive commanders who would get close to targets, press attacks, take calculated risks. Instead, many early commanders would sight a convoy, fire from maximum range, and break off when escorts counterattacked. They'd return claiming successful attacks that post-war analysis showed had accomplished nothing. Admiral Charles Lockwood, who took command of the Pacific Fleet submarine force in early 1943, recognized this problem and ruthlessly replaced cautious commanders with aggressive ones. He promoted young, bold officers who demonstrated the killer instinct that submarine warfare required. Commanders like Mush Morton of USS Wahoo, who became legendary for pressing attacks until targets were confirmed sunk. Third, there was the doctrine problem. American submarines operated as lone wolves, each boat assigned its own patrol area, each commander free to hunt however he chose. This worked when Japanese merchant ships sailed independently. But by 1943, the Japanese had started organizing convoys with destroyer escorts, exactly as the British had done in World War I to counter German U-boats. A single submarine attacking a convoy faced overwhelming odds. The escorts could pin down one attacker with depth charges while the convoy dispersed. The submarine might get one ship, maybe two if lucky, but then had to evade counterattacks and couldn't pursue the escaping merchants. What was needed was coordinated attacks by multiple submarines. Wolfpack tactics like the Germans were using in the Atlantic. Multiple submarines working together could overwhelm convoy escorts, sink multiple merchants, and multiply their effectiveness. But American submarine commanders resisted this idea. They'd operated independently their whole careers. They liked the freedom of lone wolf operations. They didn't want to coordinate with other boats, didn't want to share credit for sinks, didn't want the complications of group tactics. The resistance came partly from personality. Submarine commanders were, by nature, independent-minded individuals who preferred operating alone. They were comfortable with solitary command, with making their own decisions without consulting anyone. The idea of coordinating with other submarines, of potentially taking orders from another commander, went against their instincts. There was also a practical concern about communication. Coordinating multiple submarines required radio communication, and radio communication meant detection by Japanese direction-finding equipment. Every transmission risked revealing submarine locations. Lone wolf operations minimized radio use, which seemed safer. And there was a cultural factor. The U.S. Navy had a tradition of individual initiative and decentralized command. Submarine commanders were given patrol areas and told to use their best judgment. Micromanaging from headquarters was considered poor leadership. Wolfpack tactics seemed to contradict this tradition by requiring more centralized control. But by mid-1943, the situation demanded change. Japanese convoys were getting larger and better escorted. Japanese anti-submarine warfare was improving. The opportunity to devastate Japanese merchant shipping was there, but only if American submarines could coordinate their attacks. Enter two men who would champion Wolfpack tactics: Captain Charles Swede Mommsen and Vice Admiral Charles Lockwood. Mommsen was already a legend in the submarine force. He'd invented the Mommsen lung, a breathing apparatus that allowed submariners to escape from sunken submarines. He'd led the successful rescue of 33 men from USS Squalus in 1939, the first time anyone had successfully rescued submarine crew from a sunken boat. He was innovative, creative, and willing to challenge conventional wisdom. Lockwood was the commander who'd replace the cautious skippers with aggressive ones. He understood that winning the submarine war required both better tactics and better commanders. When Mommsen approached him with ideas about Wolfpack operations, Lockwood listened. In March 1943, Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet, sent a directive to Admiral Chester Nimitz: form a tactical group of 4 to 6 submarines trained in coordinated action. King had been watching the success of German U-boat Wolfpacks in the Atlantic and wanted similar capabilities in the Pacific. The directive went to Lockwood for action. A planning board at Pearl Harbor studied the issue and recommended essentially no change to current tactics. The board argued that the vast distances of the Pacific, the different convoy patterns, and the communication challenges made Atlantic-style Wolfpacks impractical. This recommendation could have ended the whole initiative. But Mommsen and another forward-thinking officer, Captain John Babe Brown, kept pushing. They argued that dismissing Wolfpack tactics without even trying them was a mistake. They believed coordinated submarine attacks could work in the Pacific if properly adapted to Pacific conditions. Mommsen's argument was simple: yes, the Pacific was different from the Atlantic. Japanese convoys were smaller than Atlantic convoys, usually fewer than 10 ships. The distances were greater. The operating environment was different. So don't copy German tactics exactly, adapt them. Create American Wolfpack doctrine specifically designed for Pacific conditions. His proposal: groups of 3 submarines, not the dozen or more boats the Germans used. 3 boats departing port together, training together during transit to patrol areas, developing group cohesion and tactics before encountering the enemy. A senior captain would command the pack, but with much looser control than German BDU exercised over U-boats. The American Wolfpack would use 2 tactical concepts: flankers and a trailer. The flankers would position themselves parallel to a convoy's course, sometimes racing ahead in what submariners called an end-around to get ahead of the convoy. The trailer would track the convoy from behind, keeping the flankers informed of course and speed, waiting for opportunities to attack from the rear. This formation allowed successive attacks. The flankers would strike first, drawing the escorts toward them. While the escorts were busy, the trailer would attack from behind. Or if the convoy changed course to evade the flankers, it might run straight into the trailer. Multiple submarines could keep pressure on a convoy, preventing the escorts from concentrating on any single attacker. Lockwood approved a trial. On October 1, 1943, 3 submarines departed Midway under Mommsen's command: USS Ciro, USS Shad, and USS Grayback. They would be America's first Wolfpack in the Pacific. The men aboard these submarines knew they were trying something new. They trained during the transit, practicing communications, coordination, and tactics. Mommsen had drilled them repeatedly on how to work together, how to share information, how to attack as a unit rather than 3 independent boats. They were ready to prove that American submarines could hunt in packs, that 3 boats working together could accomplish more than 3 boats working separately, that coordination could multiply effectiveness. The question was, would it work? Mommsen's first Wolfpack patrol wasn't a perfect success, but it proved the concept worked. The pack operated east of the Marianas in October 1943, searching for Japanese convoys. They encountered several targets and conducted coordinated attacks, with varying results. Communication between boats wasn't always smooth. Coordination wasn't always perfect. But they demonstrated that submarines could work together, could share targeting information, could attack from multiple angles. Most importantly, they proved that 3 boats operating as a pack could engage targets that a single boat might avoid. When a convoy with strong escorts appeared, a lone submarine commander might decide the risk was too high. But 3 submarines could overwhelm the escorts, with 1 boat drawing attention while the others attacked. The pack sank several ships during this first patrol. More importantly, they returned with lessons learned and recommendations for improvement. Mommsen wrote a detailed report outlining what worked, what didn't, and how to make Wolfpack tactics more effective. Lockwood read the report and immediately authorized more Wolfpack operations. But he made one key decision: he wouldn't force Wolfpack tactics on commanders who didn't want to use them. The submarine force was divided into 2 commands: Lockwood's sub-pack at Pearl Harbor and Ralph Christie's SOE-pack at Fremantle, Australia. Christie preferred individual patrols and continued using them. Lockwood embraced Wolfpacks and made them standard for sub-pack operations. This meant that from late 1943 onward, most submarines operating from Pearl Harbor hunted in 3-boat packs, while submarines operating from Australia continued lone wolf operations. Both approaches worked, which suggests the skill of the commanders mattered more than the specific tactics. But Wolfpacks proved particularly effective against convoys. And as Japanese merchant shipping increasingly relied on convoys for protection, Wolfpack tactics became more valuable. The packs needed names. Someone in Lockwood's staff decided to name each pack after its commander, using alliterative nicknames that submariners loved. Thus were born Blair's Blasters, Park's Pirates, Whitaker's Wolves, Roach's Raiders, and dozens of other colorfully named packs. The naming convention served a purpose beyond morale. It gave each pack identity and cohesion. The boats in a pack trained together, operated together, and developed their own tactics and traditions. They became units with pride in their pack's accomplishments. Let's talk about how a wolf pack actually operated, using a specific example. Blair's Blasters in May-June 1944. Captain Leon Bud Blair commanded this pack, consisting of USS Shark II, USS Pintado, and USS Pilotfish. Blair was the senior captain and rowed aboard Shark. The other 2 boats had their own commanders, but coordinated with Blair. The pack departed Pearl Harbor on May 17, 1944, with 4,000 miles to cross before reaching their patrol area west of Saipan. This transit time was crucial. Blair worked his boats hard, drilling constantly on group tactics and communications. The crews practiced surfacing together, diving together, maintaining formation while running on the surface at night. They practiced the standard Wolfpack formation, flankers and trailer. 2 boats would run ahead of the convoy's estimated position, separated by about 10 miles. The 3rd boat would trail behind. When they made contact with a convoy, the boats would report positions and vectors to each other, building a complete picture of the convoy's course and speed. Communication was done primarily by low-power radio, transmitted on frequencies and schedules rotated to avoid Japanese direction finding. Messages were brief, often just position updates and target information. The goal was to share enough information for coordination without excessive radio transmission that would reveal their presence. On May 29th, Blair's Blasters reached their patrol area, a 90,000 square mile rectangle south of Japan. That's enormous about the size of Minnesota. Finding a convoy in that much ocean required patience, luck, and skill. They didn't have to wait long. On May 30th, Pilotfish spotted smoke on the horizon and dove to investigate. It was a convoy, 10 merchant ships escorted by 5 destroyers. Exactly the kind of target Wolfpacks were designed to handle. Pilotfish transmitted contact information to the other boats and shadowed the convoy, staying far enough away to avoid detection but close enough to track it. Meanwhile, Shark and Pintado maneuvered to get ahead of the convoy, racing on the surface in what submariners called an end-around. This was one of the key submarine tactics in the Pacific. During the day, submarines stayed submerged to avoid aircraft. At night, they surfaced and used their diesel engines to run at maximum speed about 80 knots for fleet boats. Most Japanese merchant ships cruised at 10 to 12 knots. So a submarine could surface at night, race ahead of a convoy at full speed, then dive before dawn and wait for the convoy to come to them. With 3 submarines, the end-around was even more effective. While 1 boat shadowed from behind, the other 2 could leapfrog ahead, dive, and set up perfect attack positions. The convoy would think they'd evaded the trailing submarine, but instead they'd be running straight toward two more submarines waiting in ambush. That's exactly what Blair's blasters did. By dawn on May 31st, Shark and Pintado were positioned ahead of the convoy. Pilotfish continued trailing from behind. The pack had the convoy boxed. Just after dawn, Shark attacked first, firing 6 torpedoes at 2 tankers. Both torpedoes hit, and both tankers began burning. The Japanese escorts immediately counterattacked, dropping depth charges and pinging with sonar. Shark went deep and rigged for silent running, trying to evade. While 5 escort ships were hunting Shark, Pintado attacked from a different angle. Commander John Beadle Roach fired 4 torpedoes at a large freighter, scoring 3 hits. The freighter exploded spectacularly, breaking in half and sinking within minutes. Now the escorts were confused. They had submarine contacts in 2 different locations. They divided their forces, some continuing to hunt Shark while others turned toward Pintado. This division of effort was exactly what Wolfpack tactics were designed to achieve: prevent the escorts from concentrating on any single submarine. With the escorts divided, Pilotfish moved in from behind. Commander Rob Sellers fired spread of torpedoes at another tanker, hitting it twice. The tanker didn't sink immediately but was clearly damaged and slowing down. The battle continued for hours. The escorts dropped dozens of depth charges, some close enough to Shark that it took minor damage. But all 3 submarines eventually evaded and regrouped after nightfall. They'd sunk 3 ships and damaged 2 others in a single coordinated attack. A lone submarine might have gotten 1 ship before being driven off. The Wolfpack tactics specifically contributed to this success by making convoy protection unsustainable for Japan. The Japanese never had enough destroyers to adequately protect all their merchant convoys. When Wolfpacks could overwhelm the escorts that were available, it meant even escorted convoys weren't safe. This forced Japan into an impossible choice: concentrate escorts on critical convoys, leaving others unprotected, or spread escorts thinly across all convoys, leaving all convoys vulnerable. Either way, submarines would sink large numbers of merchants. The human cost on both sides deserves acknowledgement. American submarines killed an estimated 30,000 to 40,000 Japanese merchant sailors during the war. These weren't combatants in the traditional sense. They were civilian sailors working on cargo ships and tankers. Many drowned when their ships were torpedoed. Others died from exposure in lifeboats. The unrestricted submarine warfare that was so militarily effective was also brutal for the men on the receiving end. Some submarine commanders struggled with this morally. They understood they were killing merchant sailors who might be fathers, brothers, sons, men, who'd probably rather not be at war. But those merchant ships were carrying fuel, ammunition, and supplies that sustained Japan's war effort. Sinking them saved Allied lives, even if it cost Japanese merchant sailors theirs. This is the moral complexity of submarine warfare that's often glossed over in triumphalist histories. Yes, American submarines helped win the war. Yes, their campaign was militarily brilliant and strategically decisive. But it also involved killing tens of thousands of men who were trying to do their jobs and survive, just like American submariners were. War is like that. There are no clean victories. Every success has a cost, and often that cost is paid by people who had no choice about being there. Before we get to Operation Barney and the Sea of Japan, we need to talk about the man who changed submarine warfare in the Pacific. The commander who proved that aggressive tactics worked, who inspired an entire generation of submarine skippers, and whose loss shocked the entire submarine force. Lieutenant Commander Dudley Walker Morton. Mush to everyone who knew him. Morton got his nickname at the Naval Academy, Mushmouth, shortened to Mush, supposedly, because he had a tendency to tell tall tales. But there was nothing fictional about what he accomplished in command of USS Wahoo. Morton was different. He gave a speech to the crew before their first patrol under his command that became legendary. He told them that Wahoo was expendable, that they would aggressively seek out and sink Japanese ships regardless of the danger, that anyone who didn't want to be part of that mission had 30 minutes to request a transfer. No questions asked, no negative marks on their record. Nobody left. Morton also made an unusual decision about how to fight the boat. Normally, submarine commanders personally operated the periscope during attacks. They'd call out ranges, bearings, angles. They'd make all the firing decisions themselves. It meant the skipper was intensely focused on the periscope picture but might miss other information. Morton decided to let his executive officer, Lieutenant Richard O'Kane, run the periscope. O'Kane would call out observations. Morton would stand back, processing all the information periscope observations. Sonar contacts, plot board, everything, and make tactical decisions from a more complete picture. It was unorthodox. Most captains couldn't imagine giving up the periscope. But Morton had absolute faith in O'Kane, and the system worked beautifully. The Morton-O'Kane partnership became the most successful command team in the submarine force. Wahoo's third war patrol, Morton's first as skipper, set the standard for what aggressive submarine warfare looked like. On January 24, 1943, Wahoo entered Wewak Harbor on the northern coast of New Guinea. This was Japanese-held territory. The harbor had defenses, patrol boats, shore batteries. Most submarine skippers would have waited outside, hoping to catch ships entering or leaving. Morton took Wahoo inside the harbor, in broad daylight. He figured the Japanese wouldn't expect a submarine to be that audacious, and he was right. Wahoo found a Japanese destroyer, Harusame, at anchor. Morton decided to attack. But as Wahoo maneuvered into position, Harusame got underway, heading straight toward Wahoo at high speed. The destroyer had spotted the submarine's periscope. Most submarine commanders would have dove deep and tried to escape. Morton did the opposite. He turned Wahoo to point directly at the onrushing destroyer and fired a single torpedo down the throat, straight at a target coming toward you. This was incredibly dangerous. If the torpedo missed, the destroyer would be on top of them within seconds, dropping depth charges. If the torpedo hit but didn't detonate, same problem. It required perfect firing solution, nerves of steel, and absolute confidence. O'Kane called out the range, 1,500 yards. 1,200 yards, 1,000 yards. Morton waited. 800 yards, 600 yards. Fire one! The torpedo left the tube, running straight and true. Morton immediately ordered hard left rudder and full speed, turning Wahoo to present her stern to the destroyer. If the torpedo missed, they'd need those precious seconds to get away. The torpedo hit. The explosion was massive. Harusame's bow disintegrated. The destroyer lost way, dead in the water and sinking. Wahoo escaped while Japanese patrol boats scrambled to respond. That down-the-throat shot became legendary. Other submarine commanders heard about it and started attempting the same tactic. It proved that aggressive action, pressing attacks home, could overcome seemingly impossible odds. But Wahoo wasn't done. 2 days later, on January 26th, Wahoo found a large Japanese convoy, troop transports, cargo ships escorted by destroyers. Morton didn't hesitate. He attacked immediately. The battle lasted 14 hours. Morton pressed attack after attack, firing spreads of torpedoes, diving to evade destroyers, surfacing to fire more torpedoes, diving again. It was a running gun battle through the afternoon and into the night. Wahoo sank multiple ships including the transport Biomaru, which was carrying over 1,100 Indian prisoners of war being transported by the Japanese. When Biomaru sank, hundreds of survivors ended up in the water, clinging to wreckage and lifeboats. Morton surfaced Wahoo and ordered the deck guns to fire on the survivors. The reasoning was that these were enemy soldiers who, if rescued, would fight again. But the actual situation was more complicated. Most of the survivors were Indian POWs, not Japanese troops. This incident remains controversial. By the laws of war, even in 1943, firing on shipwrecked survivors was prohibited. Morton's executive officer, Dick O'Kane, later explained that Morton believed he was preventing enemy troops from reaching shore. That every soldier killed meant one less enemy soldier to face later. But they had misidentified who was actually in the water. The incident may have cost Morton the Medal of Honor. He was recommended for it, but some believe the Biomaru incident prevented the award from being granted. Instead, Morton received the Navy Cross, the second highest award for valor. Whatever the controversy, Wahoo's third patrol was spectacularly successful. When Morton radioed his results to Pearl Harbor, the response from Admiral Charles Lockwood was enthusiastic. Congratulations on a job well done. And then, tellingly, Japanese think a submarine Wolfpack operating in Yellow Sea. All shipping tied up. One submarine, one commander. And the Japanese thought it was multiple boats working together. That's how effective Morton's aggressive tactics were. Wahoo's fourth patrol in March-April 1943 was even more audacious. Morton was assigned to the extreme northern reaches of the Yellow Sea, near the mouth of the Yalu River off Korea. No American submarine had ever operated there. The water was shallow, averaging only 120 feet, which meant minimal room to evade depth charges. The area was heavily patrolled. It seemed like a suicide mission. Morton went anyway. He found the Japanese completely unprepared. They didn't expect American submarines in those waters. Merchant ships sailed without heavy escorts. Morton went on a rampage, sinking ship after ship. When Wahoo ran out of torpedoes, Morton used deck guns. When a small patrol vessel approached, the Wahoo crew made Molotov cocktails, gasoline in bottles with cloth wicks, a gift from the Marines at Midway, and sank it with firebombs. By the time Wahoo finished the patrol, she'd sunk 9 ships in the Yellow Sea. The Japanese were panicked. They diverted destroyers to hunt the submarine they thought was a Wolfpack. Shipping in the Yellow Sea came to a virtual halt. Morton and Wahoo returned to Pearl Harbor as conquering heroes. The crew was celebrated. Morton gave press conferences. Admiral Nimitz personally congratulated them. Wahoo had proven what aggressive submarine warfare could accomplish. But the aggressive tactics came at a cost. In September 1943, Morton requested permission to return to the Sea of Japan, the body of water between Japan and Korea, Manchuria. One other submarine, USS Permit, had operated there briefly in 1942 but accomplished little. Morton believed Wahoo could succeed where others hadn't. Permission was granted. Morton elected to take a full load of the newly arrived Mark 18 electric torpedoes rather than risk more malfunctions with the Mark 14 steam torpedoes that had plagued earlier patrols. The Mark 18 was slower but more reliable, and it left no telltale wake. Wahoo departed Pearl Harbor in August 1943, stopped at Midway for fuel and supplies, and headed for La Perouse Strait, the passage between Sakhalin and Hokkaido that led into the Sea of Japan. On September 20th, Wahoo entered the Sea of Japan. Another submarine, USS Sawfish, would follow a few days later. They were going into what the Japanese considered their private lake, heavily defended, mined, and constantly patrolled. For 3 weeks, Wahoo operated in the Sea of Japan. She sank at least 4 ships, possibly more. The Japanese were shocked that an American submarine had penetrated their inner sanctum. They intensified anti-submarine patrols, particularly around the exits. On October 11, 1943, Wahoo was scheduled to exit through La Perouse Strait. That was the last day anyone heard from her. Japanese records show that on October 11th, an anti-submarine aircraft spotted a surface submarine in La Perouse Strait and attacked, dropping 3 depth charges. Patrol boats converged on the location and conducted additional attacks. A large oil slick appeared on the surface. Wahoo never reported that she'd cleared the strait. By December 2, 1943, she was declared overdue and presumed lost. All 79 men aboard, including Morton, were gone. The loss of Wahoo and Morton sent shockwaves through the submarine force. Morton had been more than just a successful commander. He'd been an inspiration. Other submarine skippers modeled themselves on his aggressive tactics. Young officers dreamed of serving under him. He'd proven that submarines could devastate Japanese shipping if commanded boldly. Admiral Lockwood was devastated. He'd championed aggressive commanders like Morton, promoted them, given them the best boats and the best patrol areas. Now his most successful skipper was gone. Dick O'Kane, Morton's former executive officer who'd gone on to command USS Tang, later wrote, "Morton lined up an impressive number of firsts during the short 10 months he commanded Wahoo. First to penetrate an enemy harbor and sink a ship therein. First to use successfully a down-the-throat shot. And first to wipe out an entire convoy single-handed. The decision was made, no more submarine operations in the Sea of Japan. The risks were too high. The Japanese defenses were too strong. The Sea of Japan would remain off-limits until new technology made it safer to penetrate. That ban would last until June 1945, when Operation Barney would attempt what Wahoo had tried, entering the Sea of Japan and attacking Japanese shipping in their home waters. But this time, they'd have equipment Wahoo didn't, FM sonar capable of detecting mines. Morton's legacy lived on. The aggressive tactics he pioneered became standard throughout the submarine force. Commanders who would have been conservative in 1942 became bold in 1944, inspired by Morton's example. His down-the-throat shot became a standard tactic taught in training. In post-war assessments, Morton was credited with sinking 19 ships totaling approximately 55,000 tons. That made him one of the top 3 submarine commanders of the entire war in terms of ships sunk. He received 4 Navy Crosses, the last posthumously. Wahoo earned 6 battle stars and a Presidential Unit Citation. A destroyer, USS Morton, DD to 948, was later named in his honor, serving from 1959 to 1992. But more than the statistics, more than the awards, Morton changed how the submarine war was fought. He proved that aggressive commanders willing to take calculated risks could devastate enemy shipping. He showed that a single submarine, aggressively employed, could tie up enemy resources and disrupt entire regions. And he paid the ultimate price for pressing those aggressive tactics into the most dangerous waters in the Pacific. The story of American submarine wolfpacks can't be told without much Morton. Because while wolfpacks were about coordination and group tactics, they were also about the aggressive spirit that Morton exemplified. The willingness to press attacks home, to take risks, to hunt the enemy wherever they could be found. That spirit would animate the wolfpacks that hunted across the Pacific in 1944 and 1945, and it would inspire the men who volunteered for Operation Barney, the mission to penetrate the Sea of Japan and finish what Morton started. The Sea of Japan sits between the Japanese home islands and the Asian mainland. It's about 600 miles north to south, 400 miles east to west, roughly the size of California. 3 straits connect it to the Pacific: Tsushima Strait in the south between Japan and Korea, Tsugaru Strait between Honshu and Hokkaido, and La Perouse Strait between Hokkaido and Sakhalin. The Japanese called it their inner sea, their private lake. By early 1944, after Wahoo's loss, the Sea of Japan had become forbidden territory for American submarines. Too dangerous. Too well defended, the entrance straits were mined heavily. Japanese anti-submarine patrols were thick. The risk wasn't worth the reward. Except the reward was potentially enormous. See, by 1945, American submarines had devastated Japanese merchant shipping across the Pacific. The convoys from Southeast Asia were being slaughtered. Tankers from the Dutch East Indies rarely made it to Japan. The shipping lanes from China were death traps. Japan's merchant fleet, which had numbered over 6 million tons in 1941, was down to barely 2 million tons. But one area remained relatively safe: the Sea of Japan. Japanese ships could operate there with minimal risk from American submarines. Ferries moved troops and supplies between Honshu, Hokkaido, and Korea. Freighters brought coal from Hokkaido. Fishing vessels provided food. The Sea of Japan had become Japan's lifeline, the one place where shipping could move without constant submarine threat. Admiral Charles Lockwood, commanding Subpack, knew this. He also knew that penetrating the Sea of Japan would be psychological warfare as much as military. If American submarines could operate in Japan's inner sea, if they could sink ships in waters the Japanese considered safe, it would demonstrate that nowhere was secure, that Japan was completely blockaded, that surrender was inevitable. But how to get in? The 3 straits connecting the Sea of Japan to the Pacific were all heavily mined. Tsushima Strait in the south had 4 lines of mines stretched across it. Tsugaru Strait was similar. La Perouse Strait, where Wahoo had been lost, was even worse. The answer came from the University of California Division of War Research Labs. They'd been working on something called FM sonar frequency modulated sonar. Unlike standard sonar that sent out pings to detect ships, FM sonar used frequency modulation to detect smaller objects underwater. Things like mines. The system worked by sweeping through frequencies as it swept in bearing. A non-directional hydrophone could determine the bearing of a return signal from its frequency alone. When FM sonar detected a mine, it created a bright, pear-shaped image on a screen and emitted a clear, ringing tone. The submariners called it Hell's Bells. The range was limited, maybe 800 yards under ideal conditions, often less. But that was enough. A submarine creeping through a minefield at periscope depth could detect mines ahead, plot their positions, and navigate between them. In theory. In practice, FM sonar was temperamental. It worked beautifully in testing, then failed under operational conditions. Sometimes it picked up fish schools and identified them as mines. Sometimes it missed mines entirely. The signals were often muddy, unclear, difficult to interpret, but it was the only option. Without FM sonar, penetrating the minefields was suicide. With FM sonar, it was merely extremely dangerous. In April 1945, Lockwood assigned Commander William Barney Seagloff to plan and execute a mission into the Sea of Japan. Seagloff was a veteran of 7 war patrols with 15 ships sunk. He was experienced, aggressive, and thorough. Exactly the kind of commander needed for this operation. The mission was named Operation Barney after Seagloff. 9 submarines would participate, divided into 3 3-boat groups. All would be equipped with FM sonar. All would transit Tsushima Strait on successive nights, entering the Sea of Japan and spreading out to hunt. The 9 boats were organized into 3 packs. The Hepcats, USS Sea Dog, USS Crevalle, USS Spadefish. The Polecats, USS Tunny, USS Skate, USS Bonefish. The Bobcats, USS Flying Fish, USS Tinosa, USS Bowfin. Together, they were called Heidman's Hellcats, after Commander Earl Heidman, the overall pack commander who rode aboard Sea Dog. The training was intensive. The boats practiced with FM sonar for weeks, learning to interpret the signals, distinguish mines from other objects, navigate through simulated minefields. They practiced operating at periscope depth for extended periods since they'd need to transit the minefields submerged. The crews were briefed on what they faced. 4 lines of mines across Tsushima Strait. Moored mines at varying depths, swinging on their cables. Japanese patrol boats above. A transit time of approximately 20 hours submerged, creeping through at 3 to 4 knots. No surfacing, no way to get fresh air. Just slow, careful navigation with the hope that FM sonar would show them where the mines were. Every man volunteered. Nobody had to go on this mission. Lockwood made that clear. It was possibly the most dangerous submarine operation of the entire war. But all 9 crews volunteered. They wanted to finish what Wahoo had started. They wanted revenge for Mush Morton and his 78 men. On May 27, 1945, the first 3 submarines, the Hepcats, departed Guam, heading for Tsushima Strait. The Polecats followed the next night. The Bobcats brought up the rear on May 29th. The transit to Tsushima Strait took several days. The submarines ran on the surface at night, charging batteries and making good time. During the day, they submerged to avoid Japanese patrol aircraft. As they approached the strait, tension mounted. On June 4th, just after midnight, the Hepcats reached the entrance to Tsushima Strait. Sea Dog was in the lead, with Lieutenant Commander Richard Latham commanding. Latham had been briefed on what to expect, but briefings couldn't capture the reality of what he was about to attempt. The submarine slowed to 3 knots and dove to periscope depth. The FM sonar was activated. Almost immediately, the hell's bells started ringing. P-I-N-G, ping, ping. The sonar screen lit up with contacts. Mines. Dozens of them. Everywhere. And then the FM sonar glitched. Instead of clear, bright images, Sea Dog's screen showed vague blobs. The hell's bells sounded mushy, unclear. The system that was supposed to guide them through the minefield wasn't working properly. Latham had a decision to make. Turn back, abort the mission, report that FM sonar wasn't reliable enough, or press ahead, trusting that even with degraded sonar they could navigate through? He chose to press ahead. They'd come too far to turn back now. For the next 20 hours, Sea Dog crept through the minefields. The degraded FM sonar gave hints of where mines were, but not precise locations. Latham and his crew navigated by feel, by experience, by luck. They heard mine cables scraping against the hull, a sound that made everyone's blood run cold. One strong current pushing the submarine into a mine would end everything. But they made it. After 20 hours submerged, after creeping through 4 lines of mines with malfunctioning sonar, Sea Dog surfaced in the Sea of Japan. Behind her, Crevalle and Spadefish followed, both making it through successfully. The Polecats followed 2 nights later. They had functioning FM sonar, which made their transit somewhat easier, though easier was relative when you were surrounded by mines. All 3 Polecats made it through. The Bobcats, including USS Bowfin, which is now a museum ship at Pearl Harbor, came last. Bowfin's crew later reported that hell's bells rang almost constantly throughout the entire transit. Every few hundred yards, another mine. The FM sonar worked, showing mines ahead, but there were so many of them that the ringing became a constant background noise. Some crew members started calling it the bells from hell. By June 9th, all 9 submarines were in the Sea of Japan, and spreading out to assigned patrol areas. They'd accomplished what many thought impossible, penetrating the heavily defended straits and entering Japan's inner sanctum. Now came the hunting. The submarine wolfpack tactics developed during World War II influenced naval warfare for decades afterward. The fundamental concepts: coordinated attacks by multiple submarines, sharing intelligence, overwhelming defenses became standard doctrine. During the Cold War, both American and Soviet submarines adopted wolfpack tactics for operations against enemy shipping and naval forces. The technology evolved dramatically with nuclear power and guided missiles, but the basic tactical principles remained. Modern submarine warfare is vastly different from World War II in many ways. Nuclear submarines can stay submerged indefinitely. Wire-guided torpedoes and cruise missiles can be launched from dozens of miles away. Satellite communications and sophisticated sensors provide information that 1940s submariners couldn't imagine. But some things remain the same. Submarines still operate independently, or in coordinated groups depending on the mission. They still use stealth as their primary defense. They still depend absolutely on crew coordination and competence. And they still represent a form of warfare where mistakes are unforgiving and death comes quickly. The memorial at the Submarine Force Museum in Groton, Connecticut, lists all 52 submarines lost during World War II. The names are etched in black granite. Sealion S-36, S-26, Shark, Perch, S-27, Grunion, S-39, Argonaut, Amberjack, Grampus, Triton, Pickerel, Grenadier, Runner, R-12, Grayling, Pompano, Cisco, S-44, Dorado, Wahoo, Corvina, Sculpin, Capelin, Scorpion, Escaler, Albacore, Growler, Swordfish, Barbel, Kete, Trigger, Snook, Lagardo, Bonefish, Bullhead, Robalo, Flyer, Harder, Seawolf, Darter, Shark 2, Tang, Tullabee, Gudgeon, Herring, Gullet, S-28. Each name represents approximately 70 to 80 men lost. Fathers, sons, brothers, husbands. Men who volunteered for submarine duty, who trained together, who fought together, who died together. The last boat on that list, USS Bullhead, was sunk on August 6, 1945, the same day the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. She was the last U.S. submarine lost in World War II, going down with all 84 men aboard just days before Japan surrendered. Every year at submarine memorial ceremonies, when the list of lost boats is read, submarine veterans and active duty submariners stand at attention. When each boat's name is read, a bell is rung. The ceremony takes about 20 minutes to read all 52 names. 20 minutes to honor 3,506 men who never came home. It's a powerful reminder that the statistics 5.3 million tons sunk, 55% of Japanese merchant shipping losses represent real people who died. Both the submariners who died in their boats and the merchant sailors who died on the ships that were sunk. The tactical and technological legacy of World War II submarine warfare extends beyond just military applications. The Wolfpack concept of coordinated units sharing information and attacking from multiple directions influenced everything from business strategy to sports tactics. The idea that coordination multiplies effectiveness more than just adding units is now fundamental across many fields. The individual boats that survive as museums serve an important function. USS Bowfin in Pearl Harbor sees over 300,000 visitors annually. People can walk through the submarine, see the cramped conditions, understand what life was like aboard these boats. For many visitors, it's their first real understanding of what submarine service involved. The crews who serve as volunteer docents are often World War II veterans or their families. They tell stories, answer questions, and preserve memories. One volunteer at USS Cod in Cleveland is the son of a man who died aboard USS Grunion. He volunteers because it's his way of honoring his father's service and ensuring people understand what submariners sacrificed. The technological lineage from World War II submarines to modern submarines is clear. The fleet boats of 1941 to 1945 were the ancestors of today's nuclear submarines. The basic hull form, the arrangements of compartments, even some of the systems all evolved from those diesel-electric boats. USS Virginia, commissioned in 2004 and the lead ship of the newest class of American attack submarines, carries forward that legacy. She's nuclear-powered, has sonar systems that would seem like magic to 1940s submariners, and can launch cruise missiles from vertical tubes. But she's still a submarine designed to hunt enemies underwater, and her crew still wears silver dolphins, and she still honors the traditions of the silent service. The ethos of submarine service, independence, technical competence, the willingness to operate in an unforgiving environment where mistakes kill everyone, that remains unchanged. Modern submariners go through qualification processes that would be familiar to World War II submariners. They learn every system aboard their boat. They prove they can handle emergencies. They earn their dolphins the same way their grandfathers and great-grandfathers did. And they remember. Every submarine has a plaque listing boats on eternal patrol. Every submarine crew knows the history. They know about Mush Morton and Wahoo. They know about Operation Barney. They know about the 52 boats and 3,506 men who never came home. Because submarine service is about more than just operating a boat. It's about being part of a tradition, a brotherhood, a lineage that extends back to the men who took diesel-electric boats into the Pacific and hunted the Japanese fleet with malfunctioning torpedoes and aggressive tactics and absolute determination. The Wolfpack tactics that this story has focused on were one piece of a larger campaign. But they represent something important about American naval warfare in World War II, the willingness to adapt, to try new approaches, to learn from both successes and failures. Early in the war, submarines operated as lone wolves with conservative tactics and defective torpedoes. By mid-war, they'd fixed the torpedoes, adopted aggressive tactics, and were beginning to use coordinated attacks. By war's end, they were conducting complex operations like Barney that required precision coordination and technological sophistication. That evolution happened fast, about 3 years from conservative individual patrols to wolfpacks penetrating the Sea of Japan. It happened because commanders like Lockwood were willing to try new approaches. Because captains like Momsen pushed for better tactics. Because skippers like Morton proved what aggressive action could accomplish. And because thousands of submariners executed these tactics with skill and courage. The result was one of the most successful submarine campaigns in naval history. A campaign that strangled Japan's economy, contributed decisively to Allied victory, and demonstrated that undersea warfare had come of age as a strategic weapon. Lieutenant Commander Richard Latham brought USS Dog back to Guam on June 27, 1945. The submarine had been at sea for 58 days. The crew was exhausted, bearded, and smelling like they hadn't showered in 2 months because they hadn't. But they'd accomplished the mission. They'd penetrated the minefields, operated in the Sea of Japan, sunk Japanese ships, and made it back out alive. Operation Barney was complete. Admiral Lockwood was at the pier to greet them. He shook hands with every officer, thanked them personally, told them they'd done something that would be remembered. Then he went to the next pier and greeted Crevalle, and the next pier for Spadefish, and so on as each submarine returned. For Lockwood, this was both triumph and heartbreak. Triumph because the operation succeeded beyond what many thought possible. Heartbreak because USS Bonefish didn't come back. 85 more men added to the Eternal Patrol list. 85 more families getting telegrams. Latham stood on Sea Dog's deck that evening, watching the sun set over Guam, thinking about the mine transit through Tsushima Strait, about the Hell's bells ringing constantly, about the FM sonar showing mines everywhere, about scraping past mine cables so close they could hear them against the hull. One of his junior officers asked, "Would you do it again, sir?" Latham thought about that, about the fear, about the crew members who'd been shaking during the mine transit, about Bonefish not making it back, about the Japanese merchant ships they'd sunk and the merchant sailors who died. "If I had to," he said finally, "if the mission required it, yeah, I'd do it again." That answer captures something essential about submarine service in World War II. These men didn't seek out danger for its own sake. They weren't reckless. But when the mission required penetrating minefields, when it required operating close to enemy shores, when it required taking risks that might get everyone killed, they did it. Because that's what the mission required. The Wolfpack tactics that brought American submarines from early war failures to late war dominance weren't just about technical innovations or tactical coordination. They were about the men who executed those tactics, who took diesel-electric boats into harm's way, who lived for months at a time in cramped steel tubes, who endured depth charge attacks and mechanical failures and bad food and stale air, who sank Japanese ships knowing that merchant sailors were dying, who lost friends and shipmates and kept going anyway. 3,506 American submariners died in World War II, but the submariners who survived, approximately 12,500 men, came home having accomplished something remarkable. They'd crippled Japan's war economy. They'd proven submarine warfare was a decisive strategic weapon. They'd sunk more Japanese shipping than all other forces combined. And they'd done it by learning to hunt in packs, by coordinating attacks, by sharing information and overwhelming defenses and pressing attacks home regardless of the danger. The lone wolf submarine patrols of early war gave way to coordinated wolfpacks by mid-war. Individual commanders like Mush Morton inspired others with aggressive tactics. Technological improvements like FM sonar made previously impossible missions feasible. Forward bases shortened transit times and lengthened patrol durations. All of these factors combined to create the most successful submarine campaign in naval history. A campaign that strangled an island nation's economy and helped force its surrender. This is the story of how American submarines learned to hunt in wolf packs. How they adapted, improved, and ultimately dominated. How 2% of Navy personnel accounted for 55% of Japanese shipping losses. The story of the silent service. The men who fought underwater, hunted in packs, and helped win the Pacific War. That's what they did. That's who they were. That's why it matters. To the boats on eternal patrol, rest in peace. Your mission is complete. To the submariners who came home, thank you for your service. Your sacrifices saved lives and won the war. To the families who waited and worried, your strength sustained the men who fought. And to everyone who wears or has worn the silver dolphins, you are part of a tradition of courage, competence, and sacrifice that began in World War II and continues today. That's the legacy of the submarine wolfpacks. Not just tactics and tonnage sunk, but a demonstration of what people can accomplish when they work together, adapt to challenges, and refuse to accept that anything is impossible. Fair winds and following seas to all who serve.